The gravel moved before Rail did. He had been crouching near the base of the ridge for 20 minutes, scraping mineral samples into small glass tubes and labeling each one by hand the way he always did. Slowly, carefully, the way his old professor had taught him back on Earth. The sky above Virith 7 was still dark purple at the edges. The sun had not fully come up yet. The air smelled like iron and cold stone that he was reaching for his fourth tube when he heard it. A soft scraping sound. Not wind. Not rocks settling. Something deliberate. He turned around slowly. There was a dragon sitting in the gravel behind him. Not a big one. That was the first thing his brain registered. This one was small, barely reaching his knee if it stood up straight. It was silver, the kind of silver that looks almost white in low light, and it was sitting completely still, watching him with two golden eyes the size of large coins. One of its wings was wrong. The left one sat folded too tight against its body, the bones clearly not shaped the way they should be. The right wing was fine, tucked neatly, but the left one had a bend in it that no wing was supposed to have. Rail looked at it. It looked at him that he turned back to his samples. The scraping sound started again that he turned around. The hatchling had moved 3 steps closer. It stopped the moment his eyes landed on it. Sat down again. Waited. Rail picked up his case and walked 10 meters to the left toward the next sample site. He heard the scraping follow him. He stopped. The scraping stopped. He walked again. It followed again. He put down his case and pulled out his scanner. The device was old and reliable, and it told him what he already suspected. No clutch bond signal. Every hatchling in a nest carried a frequency, a biological marker tied to its birth group. This one had nothing. The signal was either gone or it had never registered properly. Either way, it meant one thing. The clutch had left it. He looked back at the cliffs where the dragon nests were built into the rock face, high up and out of reach. Nothing moved up there. No adults circling. No sounds. Whatever group this hatchling had come from, they were gone. He crouched down to get a better look at it. The hatchling did not flinch. Most wild animals on Virith 7 ran from humans on instinct. The outpost staff had been briefed on that in their first week. This one sat like it had already made a decision and was simply waiting for Rail to catch up. He noticed the gravel around its front feet. It had scraped a path through it, a long, uneven line leading back toward the ridge where he had first been working. That path was at least 60 meters long, on 3 working limbs, dragging the 4th. This animal had followed him across 60 meters of rough stone ground before sunrise. He did not know what to say to a dragon hatchling. He said nothing. That he went back to work. That IT sat on his sample case. Not aggressively. Not destructively. It simply walked over to the case, stepped up onto the flat top of it, sat down, and looked out at the landscape the way a creature looks at something it has decided belongs to it. Rail stood up, looked at the sample case, looked at the hatchling, and then sat down on the ground nearby and opened a secondary pouch to keep working from there. The hatchling watched him sort tubes for a while, and then looked away at the horizon, apparently satisfied by the time the sun had fully risen and the sky had gone from purple to a pale orange-gray. Rail had 12 samples labeled and packed. The hatchling had not moved from the case. It had yawned once, showing very small but very sharp teeth, and then gone back to watching the distance. Rail packed up his gear. He picked up the sample case, hatchling and all, and carried it 2 steps before he realized what he was doing. He set the case down. The hatchling looked at him. He looked at the hatchling. That he set it down in the gravel gently. It stood on the ground now, watching him. He pointed back toward the cliffs. That IT looked in that direction. That looked back at him. That he walked toward the outpost. The scraping followed. That he did not stop again. He walked the full path back to the outpost gate, and the hatchling came the entire way, 3 limbs working hard, the 4th dragging slightly, never more than 2 meters behind him. When he reached the gate, the sensor beeped twice, standard entry scan. Then it beeped a 3rd time, which it was not supposed to do, and a small yellow light came on. Unknown organism detected. Please report to director on duty. Rail looked at the yellow light. He looked down at the hatchling. IT looked up at him with those gold coin eyes, calm as still water, and then it walked through the gate ahead of him like it had already decided the outpost was home and was simply waiting for Rail to follow. He stood there for a moment. Then he followed it inside. The mess hall held 11 people at breakfast on a normal morning. When Rail walked in, it held 11 people, one silver hatchling, and a specific kind of silence that only happens when everyone in a room sees something at the same time and none of them are sure whether to speak first. The hatchling was on his shoulder. It had climbed there somewhere between the gate and the corridor, using his jacket sleeve as a step and his collar as a handhold, and it was now sitting with its tail wrapped loosely around the back of his neck, surveying the mess hall the way a general surveys unfamiliar ground. Lyra, who was sitting closest to the door with a cup of something hot and a data pad, looked up and said, "What is that?" "A hatchling," Rail said. "I can see it's a hatchling. Why is it on your shoulder?" "It followed me back from the ridge." Lyra put down her cup. She stood up. She walked over slowly, the way you walk towards something you want to see up close, but do not want to startle. The hatchling watched her approach with calm, unblinking eyes. Lyra stopped about half a meter away and looked at the malformed wing. Her expression shifted from curious to concerned in the quiet way it did when she was already running through a mental checklist. "Its wing is wrong," she said. "I know. Has it eaten?" "Not that I saw." "Has it had water?" "I don't know." Lyra turned and went back to her station without another word. She came back with a strip of dried protein that the outpost kept for alien fauna surveys and held it out flat on her palm. The hatchling looked at the strip. It leaned forward from Rail's shoulder, took the strip with careful teeth, and ate it in 4 small bites. Then it looked at Lyra the way a person looks at someone after they have done something unexpectedly kind. Lyra said very quietly, "Oh no, I already like it." Director Orvin appeared in the doorway at that moment. Orvin was Thalvery, tall, thin, four-armed, with a flat, wide face and compound eyes that caught light like polished stone. He ran the outpost with the kind of efficiency that made him very good at his job and occasionally difficult to eat breakfast near. He looked at Rail. He looked at the hatchling. He looked back at Rail. "No," he said. "I haven't said anything yet," Rail said. "The answer is still no. Wild fauna are not permitted inside the outpost. Regulation 12, Section 4, Subsection B. Remove it. It followed me in. Then walk it back out." Rail reached for his scanner and pulled up the data from the ridge. He turned the screen so Orvin could read it. No clutch bond signal. The nest abandoned it. Under Galactic Fauna Law, Article 31, an unbonded animal that self-selects a companion cannot be forcibly removed without a formal council assessment. Removing it without that assessment is actually the violation. The compound eyes did not change expression. They were not built to. But something in the set of Orvin's shoulders shifted. He looked at the hatchling again. The hatchling looked back at him, calm and direct, the way it looked at everything. "I will be contacting the council liaison," Orvin said. "That's fine," Rail said. "This does not mean the animal is staying." "I understand." Orvin left. The mess hall, which had been extremely still during the exchange, slowly came back to life. Someone at the far table went back to eating. Someone near the window started a quiet conversation. The hatchling turned its head and watched each new sound with interest. Lyra was already moving. She had her medical scanner out and was running it along the hatchling's side. The hatchling allowed this with no complaint, turning its head occasionally to see what she was doing. "Malformed primary bone in the left wing," she said, reading the results quietly. "But the tissue is healthy. No infection. Good weight for its size. It's not sick. It was just born different. Different enough that they left it," Rail said. Lyra did not answer that directly. She pressed her lips together and kept scanning. It was about an hour later, when Rail was sitting at his work table going through the ridge samples, that the name happened. The hatchling had climbed down and was walking slowly across the table, investigating each labeled tube with its nose. It reached the edge of the table and sat there, looking out the window at the pale sky. Rail said without thinking, "Stay, Sona." His grandmother had used that word, an old word for a place far from here, meaning something like little son, though the exact meaning had always shifted depending on who used it. He had said it without deciding to. The hatchling turned its head, not toward the window, toward him, as if it had heard its name for the first time and recognized it. They looked at each other. "Sona," he said again, quieter this time. The hatchling walked back from the edge of the table and sat down near his hand. Lyra, from across the room, said, You just named it. I know, Rail said. You know what that means. I know, he said again. His comm unit beeped. The council liaison was calling back. The elder of Sona's species had been contacted. They were sending someone. Rail looked at Sona. Sona looked at the comm unit, then back at Rail, apparently unimpressed by the interruption that he answered the call. The shadow came before the sound. IT crossed the outpost yard like a storm cloud moving too fast, and by the time anyone outside looked up, the sound had already arrived, a deep, heavy beat of wings that pressed against the chest like a hand pushing from the inside. Then came the landing. The ground shook once, hard enough to rattle the trays in the mess hall and send a cup sliding off a desk in the lab. Rail stood at the window and looked at what had just landed outside the outpost walls. Elder Voss was very old. The age showed in the color of his scales. Not the bright tones of a young dragon, but something darker, like charcoal that had been through fire many times and come out quieter each time. He was long in the way that old things are long, stretched by years into something that looked less like a living creature and more like a piece of the landscape that had decided to move. A translator collar sat at the base of his neck, old technology, its surface scratched. Orvin opened the outer gate. Rail walked out to meet them. Lyra stayed near the doorway, Sona sitting on her shoulder now, because Rail had asked her to hold onto the hatchling during the meeting. The elder looked at Rail for a long moment before speaking. When he did, the translator collar gave his words a flat, even tone that took all the texture out of them. You are the human who has the hatchling. She followed me, Rail said. I didn't take her. That is consistent with her behavior, Voss said. Even as a newborn, she moved toward things that were not her own kind. It was noted early. Is that why she was left? Voss did not hesitate. She was left because she cannot carry the sky. Her wing will never open fully. She cannot fly. A dragon that cannot fly is not a dragon in the way our kind requires. This is not a judgment. It is a fact of what we are. She carried herself across 60 meters of ridge gravel on 3 limbs before sunrise. Rail said. That seems like carrying something. The elder regarded him with eyes the color of deep amber. They were very still. The hatchling has no clutch now, Voss said. Her bond frequency was severed when the nest departed. What she does now, she does outside our order. I cannot speak to that. They moved the meeting inside at Orvin's request. The formal chamber was not built for a dragon of Voss's size, but he arranged himself in the available space with the unhurried patience of something that had never needed comfort. Sona was brought in. She was set on the meeting table by Lyra, who stepped back quickly once she had done it. The room was quiet. Voss looked at the hatchling. Sona looked at Voss. What happened next was small, but not small. Sona walked to the edge of the table nearest to Voss. Not away from him, toward him. She stopped at the edge and sat there and looked at him without any sign of fear. Not challenging him, not performing anything, just looking. The elder watched her for a long time. She does not know to be afraid of me, he said. Maybe she doesn't need to be, Lyra said from the back of the room. Voss turned his gaze to Lyra briefly and then back to Sona. Fear is not always weakness. Sometimes it is knowledge. She has other knowledge, Rail said. She knows how to choose. What she has chosen, Voss said slowly, is outside what we can honor. She is not of the nest. She has not been of the nest since we departed. She carries none of our obligations, and we carry none toward her. She is already gone from us in every way that matters. The words landed flat and final in the room. Rail thought about arguing. He had a list of things he could say about compassion, about the unfairness of leaving something to die because it was born differently. He had the words ready. He had rehearsed them in his head on the walk over. He did not say any of them. Sona turned around on the table and walked back to where Rail was standing. She stepped off the table edge onto his forearm without looking down, the way she had already learned to do, and climbed up to his shoulder. She faced away from Voss. It was not dramatic. She did not hiss or spread her wings. She simply turned away from the elder the way a person turns away from a conversation that is finished and faces the thing they have decided on instead. Voss looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at Rail. Whatever she is now, the elder said, she is not ours. What you do with that is your matter, not ours. He left the same way he had arrived. The ground shook once when he lifted off. The shadow crossed the yard again, going the other direction this time, and then the sound faded and the sky was just sky again. The room held its quiet for a moment. Orvin left without speaking. Two of the alien staff members followed. Soon it was just Rael and Lyra standing in the meeting chamber. Sona pressed her head against the side of Rael's jaw. He raised one hand and rested it lightly along her back, covering most of her small body with just his palm. He could feel her breathing, quick and steady, the way small things breathe. Lyra watched from across the room. She did not say anything either. There was nothing that needed saying. Rael stood there for a while, his hand on a dragon that had been declared already gone from the world that made her, and thought about what it meant to be made, and then unmade, and then found again before noon on a frontier planet far from anywhere. Outside, the sky stayed pale and quiet. Sona stayed exactly where she was. Lyra ran the full scan in the med lab after the meeting. She did not ask Rael if it was all right to do it. She just set up the equipment and held out her hand to Sona, and Sona stepped on her palm and allowed herself to be placed on the scanning surface without complaint. She sat there looking at the ceiling sensors with mild interest while they moved slowly overhead. Rael stood near the wall with his arms folded and waited. The results came back in two parts. The first part was the wing, the same as before, malformed primary bone, permanent, non-progressive. The wing would never open fully. She would never fly the way her species flew. That was settled and had always been settled. The second part was something neither of them had looked for. Lyra read it quietly, then read it again, then turned the screen toward Rael without saying anything yet that he looked at the data. He understood most of it, but not all of it. "Explain it to me," he said. Lyra pulled a stool over and sat down. "Dragons bond," she said. "You know that. They bond to their clutch mother first, then to the nest. That bond runs on a biological signal, a frequency that the brain learns to follow. It's how the group stays together. It's how they know who is theirs. Hers doesn't work. Her frequency works," Lyra said. "It just doesn't read clutch heat signatures." The mutation that affected her wing also changed what her bond sense responds to. She paused. It responds to sustained calm presence, consistent emotional steadiness, something that stays near her without aggression or alarm and does not leave. Rael was quiet. "You were out on that ridge for over an hour," Lyra said. "Quiet, steady, working, not reacting to her, not chasing her away, not afraid of her, just present." He looked at Sona, who had finished with the ceiling sensors and was now sitting on the edge of the scanning surface watching the two of them talk. "She bonded to me," he said. "Yes, this morning. Probably within the first 20 minutes, Lyra said. "The scan shows a fully completed bond cycle. It's not partial. It's not forming. It's done." He let that settle. The dragon bond, in the literature he had read during his first year on Virith 7, was not a casual thing. It was biological, deep, and in most species that carried the trait, irreversible. It was the reason the clutch system worked. It was the reason dragons stayed together across migrations that covered hundreds of kilometers. You did not unbond from something once the cycle was complete. "What does it mean for her?" he said. "Practically." Lyra thought carefully before answering. "It means her nervous system will orient to your presence. She'll be calmer when you're near, stressed when you're gone too long. She'll learn your patterns, your rhythms. She'll fit herself to them." She paused. "It means you are, from a biological standpoint, her home. Wherever you are is where her system thinks it belongs." Rael looked at the floor for a moment, then at Sona, then back at Lyra. "Does it affect her health if the bond isn't honored?" he said. "Not quite sure how to word it." Lyra did not look away. Long-term separation from a bond anchor in dragons causes measurable stress deterioration. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He crossed to his desk, which was just off the med lab in the connected workroom. He opened the second drawer on the right side. Inside was a transfer request form he had started filling out 3 weeks ago. A post at a better-funded station, more resources, a step forward in his work. He had not submitted it yet. He had been thinking about it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it back in the drawer and pushed the drawer shut. He went back to the med lab. Sona was still on the scanning surface. He held out his arm, and she stepped onto it and walked up to his shoulder and sat there, tail settling across the back of his neck. "All right," he said. It was not directed at anyone in particular. He pulled up the outpost's official resident registration system on the wall terminal. The form was designed for staff, their equipment, and any formally approved research subjects. It had fields for name, species, classification, and purpose that he filled in each field slowly. Name: Sona. Species: dragon, virus, 7 native variant. Classification: the field had a drop-down with 12 options, none of which fit. He clicked past the drop-down and typed directly into the field point one of a kind. Purpose: resident. He submitted the form. A small confirmation appeared on the screen. Entry logged. Pending director review. He did not worry about the review. Orvin would read it, and Orvin would frown, and Orvin would leave it in the system because removing it created more paperwork than leaving it did. Lyra was washing her hands at the side sink. She did not comment on what he had just done. She had watched him do it, and that was enough. Sona pressed lightly against his ear, the way she had started doing, a small contact, brief, like punctuation. He had not asked for any of this when he walked out to the ridge before sunrise. He had gone out to collect mineral samples and label them carefully the way his professor had taught him. He had gone out to do ordinary work on an ordinary morning that he was not sure what this morning was now. But the drawer was shut, and the form was submitted, and Sona was on his shoulder. He went back to work. By midday, everyone in the outpost knew about Sona. Not because anyone made an announcement. Not because it was posted on the internal board. It spread the way things spread in small, closed places. One person saw something, told another in a corridor, and within 2 hours the information had traveled through every section of the building like water, finding its level. The staff found reasons to walk past the xenobiology lab window. Rail noticed them. He did not say anything about it. He kept his head down and worked through his ridge samples, logging data, cross-referencing mineral compositions, doing the slow and careful work that was actually his job. Sona moved around the lab as she pleased, investigating shelves, sitting on the corner of the light panel where the heat was warm, walking the perimeter of the room with the focused attention of something, making sure it knew where everything was. The Thavari were the ones Rail worried about most. There were 4 of them on the outpost staff, small, feathered, quadrupedal, assigned to equipment maintenance and general logistics. They were excellent workers and deeply nervous creatures by nature. Their threat response was calibrated to predators, and a dragon, even a small one, sat very clearly in the predator category of their instincts. The youngest of the 4 was named Brill. Brill was new to the outpost, 3 months in, still learning the layout, still jumping slightly at unexpected sounds. Every time Brill had to pass near the xenobiology lab, there was a visible recalibration in the way the small feather body moved. Careful steps, wide path around the door, eyes checking the window. Sona had noticed Brill. Rail was not sure exactly when it started, but he had caught Sona sitting near the lab window on 3 separate occasions that morning, watching the corridor outside. Not with predator focus, not still and locked on the way. She went when something was prey-sized and moving fast. Just watching. With what Rail was beginning to recognize as her general interested expression that IT happened just after the midday meal. Brill was carrying a tray of calibration tools back from the equipment room. A large tray, slightly too wide for the corridor, requiring both hands. One of the tray legs caught on a door sensor as Brill passed the lab entrance. The tray tilted. 3 tools slid off and clattered to the floor. One of them rolled into the lab doorway, which was standing open. Brill froze, not at the drop tools. At Sona, who had been on the floor near the door and was now looking directly at Brill from a distance of about 1 meter. The 2 of them were still for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then Sona walked forward slowly, lowered her head, picked up the tool that had rolled into the doorway, and carried it back out. She sat on the floor in front of Brill's feet, stepped back, and sat down. Brill did not move. Sona waited. Very slowly, with the kind of deliberate carefulness that takes more courage than it looks like, Brill reached out one small hand and touched Sona's snout. Sona closed her eyes. She stayed still, completely, deliberately still, while the touch lasted. Not pulling away, not reacting, just holding quiet the way Rail had been holding quiet on the ridge that morning, steady and present and asking nothing. Brill pulled the hand back after a few seconds. picked up the drop tools from the floor, adjusted the tray, and then stood there for one more moment and looked at Sona with something in those wide eyes that was not fear anymore. Sona opened her eyes and looked back. Then Brill walked on down the corridor. Rail, who had seen the whole thing from his desk without moving, let out a slow breath. He had not realized he was holding WY the time afternoon light came through the windows. 3 separate staff members had sent messages to other outposts mentioning the dragon. Rail knew because Lyra told him, and Lyra knew because she had been in the comm room for a scheduled check-in and had heard the tail end of 2 different conversations through open channels. The council liaison called again at mid-afternoon. This time, it was not about regulations. A research team at the Outer Catalog Station had heard about the bond formation event and wanted to request documentation access. A xenobiology professor from the Veth Institute had sent a formal inquiry. 2 more messages were waiting in the outpost's public research inbox. Orvin came to find Rail about it. He stood in the lab doorway with a datapad listing the incoming requests. He read them out in a flat voice. When he was done, he looked up. Rail said, "No." Orvin said, "They are accredited researchers. The bond formation data has scientific. She's not a research event," Rail said. "She's a resident. It's in the system." There was a pause. Orvin looked at Sona, who was on the high shelf now, sitting in the afternoon light that came through the upper window. The light was the same gold as her eyes. She was watching the room below with calm attention. Orvin looked back at Rail. "I will inform them the outpost is not currently accepting external research requests on this matter." "Thank you," Rail said. Orvin left. Rail looked up at Sona. She blinked once, slow and easy, and looked back out at the room that he had read somewhere that slow blinking in certain species was a form of ease, a signal that said, "I'm not threatened, I am not alarmed, everything here is all right." He did not know if that was true for Sona's kind. He did not know how much of what he thought he was reading in her was real and how much was him filling in the spaces. But she was on the highest shelf, in the warmest light, watching over the room below with the patient attention of something that is found where it belongs and is simply looking after it. That, at least, he was fairly sure about. Rail took Sona to the ridge at dusk, not to leave her there. He had not considered leaving her there since around the time she had picked up the drop tool for Brill, and truthfully, he had probably not considered it seriously since the moment she had walked through the gate ahead of him that morning. He went to the ridge because it was where the day had started and the day deserved to end there too, and because Sona had never seen a sunset on this world, and it seemed like something she should see. She rode on his shoulder the whole way. She had gotten better at balancing on moving terrain, or rather, she had learned his walking rhythm, the small shifts in weight and pace, and she adjusted without thinking about it now. He barely felt her there. She had become part of how he moved. The sky was doing something good. Virith. 7 sunsets ran through a specific set of colors that atmospheric charts described as a consequence of particle density and mineral content in the upper air, and that Rail privately thought was the most useful the sky ever looked. The purple was deeper now, the orange coming in at the edges, and above that a band of green that was thin and clear and only visible for about 20 minutes before it faded. They sat at the top of the first ridge. The same gravel. The same cold iron smell in the air. Sona looked at the horizon. Rail watched her watch it. Her head moved slowly, tracking the color changes with those gold eyes that picked up light and held it. Her one good wing opened slightly, not trying to fly, just opening the way you open your hand to feel rain. The bad wing stayed where it was, folded in its crooked way. He thought about Elder Voss. He thought about the word unfit, which Voss had not actually used, but which had been present in everything the Elder had said, woven underneath the careful formal language like a floor you could feel but not see. He thought about what it meant to be born into a group that had a very specific idea of what you were supposed to be and to not be that, and to be left at the foot of a cliff before you were old enough to understand any of it. And then he thought about 60 meters of ridge gravel in the dark before sunrise. 3 limbs working, 1 dragging. Moving anyway, he was not a person who made large declarations. He had never been that. He did his work carefully. He showed up consistently. He labeled his samples by hand because it was more reliable than the automated system, and because the care was part of the point. He had never understood people who needed the large gesture when the small, steady one was available. Sona pressed against his side. Her one good wing came open a little further and settled, half-folded, across his arm, not covering him to claim him, not wrapping around him like a scene from a story, just resting there. The way you rest your hand on someone's shoulder when you're sitting beside them, and there is nothing to say and nothing needs to be said. The green band at the top of the sky faded. The purple came down, footsteps on the gravel behind him. He did not need to look. Lyra sat down on his other side. She had brought a jacket and was pulling it on as she settled. She looked at the sky for a moment, then at Sona's wing on Rail's arm, then back at the sky. Brill asked about her this afternoon, Lyra said. After the thing with the tray. Asked what she eats, whether she sleeps in the lab. What did you tell them? That she eats protein strips and whatever Rail gives her, and that I didn't know about the sleeping yet. Sona turned her head toward Lyra at the sound of her voice and regarded her for a moment, then turned back to the horizon. She remembers you, Rail said. You gave her the first food. I know, Lyra said. She looked at me differently after that. Still does. They sat quiet for a while. The sky moved through its last colors slowly, the way it always did, taking its time. His comm unit buzzed in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out. Another researcher inquiry routed through the outpost system. He turned the screen off and put it back, Lyra noticed. Still coming in? They'll stop, he said. Once there's nothing new to report. Is there nothing new to report? He thought about it. A hatchling had followed him in from the dark. A council elder had formally released her from her kind. A scared Thavari maintenance worker had touched a dragon's face in a corridor and walked away with something different in their eyes. A man had pushed a transfer form to the back of a drawer and typed one of a kind into an official field and mint it without embarrassment. Nothing they'd know how to classify, he said. Lyra made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close to one. Sona shifted on his arm. She was looking at the last strip of light at the horizon, the very last of it, the thin line where the sky met the ridge in the distance. Her eyes caught it and held it. Rail thought about what Lyra had said in the med lab. Her system thinks it belongs. Wherever you are is where her home is. He had not gone looking for this. He had gone looking for mineral samples. But the thing about belonging, the real kind, the kind that holds, was that it did not always wait to be invited. Sometimes it simply arrived before sunrise, planted itself on your sample case, and waited for you to finish catching up. The last light went. The sky settled into its dark. Sona sat on his arm in the quiet and did not move to go anywhere. Neither did he. End of story.